Begin by reading James chapter 4, verse 7 through 10. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. We get from James a rather unflattering portrait of his churches, the people to whom he is writing. We have a picture of a church divided by showing partiality, preferring the rich over the poor, a church that wants to hold on to an intellectual faith only without any showing any outworking of that faith in actions and doing good works. We have a church in which tongues, their people's words, have started raging fires, and their passions have been left uncontrolled, and they've started wars. All of these things, James says, speak of divided loyalties, a church that is not given wholly to God. They're double-minded. They want God plus their passions. They want God plus their wealth. So they're not wholly seeking God. But these things, James says, these things need not be. They don't have to live this way. God gives more grace, James tells us. And the grace is given to the humble and not the proud. Given all this, James has some suggestions for the church. And these suggestions come in the form of a rapid fire list of imperatives that he shoots at them. And that's what we were looking at from verse 7 through 10. They show, these imperatives show what a person who humbles himself before God and receives grace would look like. What is this person, how is this person living out the humility that is required of him? And it begins with the command to submit. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. And that command to submit is then followed by three pairs of related imperatives. Resist the devil, draw near to God, cleanse your hands, purify your hearts, be wretched, and let your laughter be turned to mourning. And then it ends, after these three pairs of related imperatives, it ends with a return to the subject of humility and says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Now, we're going to look at these, but we're not looking at them all today. But before we really dive into them, I just want to point out the close relationship between this passage and a passage in 1 Peter, which if we do 1 Peter after James, we'll come back to this. So it's good, I think, to go ahead and show a link. 1 Peter chapter number 5, verses 5 through 9. And I'm going to just read those quickly. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that in proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. Both of these passages speak of the importance of submission, of humility. Both of them quote the Proverbs 3:34 passage and speak of those who are being humbled then, or those who humble themselves being exalted by God. And both of them put this whole thing in the context of humility and pride and humbling yourself before God. They put it in the context of spiritual warfare, of choosing between God and the devil being one who both passages say must be resisted, the devil being one who divides, who separates, who leads to double-mindedness. We are to resist him and then turn to God instead. So we're sort of given a choice. You will either serve the devil or you will serve God. And those are the choices before for the people that James and Peter are writing to. And they urge strongly that the devil be resisted. This weekend, hopefully, weather depending, but hopefully we're going to have baptism, and then again on Easter Vigil. And as I've been working with those who will be baptized, one of the things we stress in the baptismal service is that there is a series of vows that we make. And during baptismal services, especially during the Easter Vigil, it is common for all people who've been baptized to reaffirm these baptismal vows with the people who are being baptized. And the baptismal vows begin with a commitment to resist the devil, to renounce the devil and all his works. So there's a commitment to resisting the devil, the world, the flesh, and the devil. But there's a stress on saying, I renounce the devil and his leading. I am turning from him. And after 3 vows in this manner, then there's a series of vows in which the person who's being baptized turns to God and say, I receive Christ. I acknowledge and confess that Christ is Lord. And the last vow is that a promise to keep God's holy will and commandments. So there's a turning away from the devil and a turning to God and saying, I will have nothing to do with the devil and his works. I fully receive God and his work. And I commit myself to obeying his will and following his commandments. This is very much what James is after from his people, a turning from evil to God and receiving God as Lord solely in our lives, not as one of our lords, not as one of our masters, but as true God alone in our lives. And this begins with submission. James, this is sort of the heading for all of the imperatives that you give. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Submission has become, and I've said this before, submission has become a dirty word in our society, something that we are not to do. Submission means a giving up of our own will and desires, and that is ultimately the great evil in our society. To follow someone else's will is defilement, it seems, of who we are, of being authentic. So submission is an evil thing in the world of society, but it is not a dirty word in the Bible. It is a good, healthy word. It's a word of safety in the Bible, and one that is given to us as a requirement to being a child of God. Submission is a thing in which we put ourselves under the guidance of the God who created all things, the one who is only qualified to give guidance through this world. We are committing to following his direction, to keeping his commandments. Of course, if we, like the people to whom James is writing, decide that we will have other gods, we will be double-minded, God plus passions, then of course submission is not allowed, at least not submission that God demands of us. So James says no. If you want to move towards the wholeness, the completion, the perfection that he holds up for us in the very beginning of this letter, James says it must begin with submission, submitting ourselves to God's commandments as he, through his word and through his church, has given us to know them. From this will follow another set of imperatives, the other imperatives, and we'll look at those later. But I want to just leave us or begin to look at these imperatives with this. Realize we are in a battle. We are in a battle between God and the devil, between God and the world, between God and our flesh. And if we are going to win that, if we're going to be part of the winning side, if you will, then submission is imperative. Submitting ourselves to God. And that's that's not just sort of an evil pill we have to swallow. God making us go through something hard and difficult, though it may be hard and difficult. He's giving us something good and right and healthy. Submission is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Have there been times when people have abused the power given them? Absolutely. God doesn't abuse it, though. And God knows. And that is one of the great evils of those who do have power, that they have that ability. But that doesn't make submission evil. It's a tragic thing when it is abused. But it doesn't make submission an evil thing. It doesn't mean we should be vigilant and hold ourselves accountable. So submit yourselves to God. We'll look at the next set of imperatives next week. But if we are to humble ourselves, which is a question often that people ask, well, how do I humble myself? Well, James is giving us some suggestions here, and it begins, as I said, with submission. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.